Hey, this is Rob. This is episode 124 of the Folly Coffee Podcast. Let's get it brewing. All right. On the last episode with Chef Yia Vang, who is back again once today. The last episode, we had planned on talking about a food topic that we had been discussing. You made an absolutely outlandish, absurd claim to me that you said you'd be willing to defend, and that is that are mashed potatoes just the Irish version of guacamole? So welcome back for another edition of DTF. DTF stands for define the food and definitely nothing else at all. That's right. We are back with another edition of Define the Food, a.k.a. DTF.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
When you make those sound bites, do you do it by yourself here?
Yeah.
Do you, like, after you're done, you giggle?
Not so much a giggle as it is kind of sit and wonder what it is I'm doing with my life.
Like, I can just go...
Well, and then the worst is I do that, and then you'll notice it's me on top of that. So I record that, go back, record on top of it, listen to it, and say, yep, this is it. But it does give me...
how many takes does it take?
Just one.
Oh, you do it in one take?
Yeah, if you thought that was more than one take, then I'm very...
I didn't know that if you came back and you're like, no, that's the wrong key.
Nope. It's
because as a cappella
yes, of course.
guy growing up, I figured you would have different keys and you harmonize it together.
Nope. Yeah. And that's why I make that, and I think, what is it I'm doing with my life? What are the choices I have? So many things I could be doing, and I'm recording that. I'm not going to let it play. So, today's topic is, are mashed potatoes the Irish version of guacamole? For those of you who have not tuned in for an episode of DTF, typically the DTF model is we pick a food and we define what it is. We have defined sandwiches. We have defined burritos. We have defined soup. Today's is going to be a little different. However, we will be defining mashed potatoes and guacamole. There's not so much of a debate as to what those are, but anyone that listens know I do more research for these episodes than I do potentially any other episode that exists. And I have in front of me a complete history of mashed potatoes and a complete history of guacamole.
Okay.
Before we get started, I would love to hear your opening argument as to why are you making this absurd claim.
Sorry. That's why I asked when I came in there. I'm like, do you have any water?
I didn't, by the way.
I know, it hurts.
This is not that kind of operation.
Yeah. Why do I make that absurd claim? Because if you think about it, so you have guac, which is made from avocados, ripe avocados, and then you take it and you mash it, right? And you have different kinds of guac. You have what's called like the chunky or the smooth or puree. Now I started thinking about that and I'm like, wait, mashed potatoes, the same thing. You can have the rustic, they call it, which is just chunky, or you can, the texture can change. You can do like a, sometimes they'll get real fancy and goes, oh, this is a potato puree. And I'm like, dude, that's mashed potatoes, dude. Chill out. And then the flavors, like the seasoning you put into it, right? Mm-hmm. So, with mashed taters, you can do garlic, blah, 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 butter, cream, whatever. And the guac, same thing. Cilantro, jalapenos, lime juice, whatever. So if you think of it, mashed potato is like, and I mean this in the color, it's a white version of guacamole, which is green or, green, yellowish, whatever you want to call it. So, the moment when I'm saying this, and if you're watching this on camera, you see the little, like, poop eating grin he has on his face. So that's when I text you and I'm like, dude, think about this.
It's an interesting thought. Before I get into...
In timeout, you said an Irish mashed potato. Like, is mashed potato really from Ireland?
Well, that's going to be covered in the history. I thought that's how you originally phrased it, as like an Irish version of guacamole.
Yeah.
Because I think many people associate Irish with potato.
Oh, and I'm so ready for all your rebuttals on this too, because I was thinking about it today on the drive over.
That's good, because that's what today's episode is about. And that's
we're gonna be DTFing.
I spent roughly an hour researching. I spent roughly an hour researching mashed potatoes and avocado. So I'm glad to hear that on the way over you thought about it a little bit.
I've been thinking about this for the last 2 months that we talked about, 3 months.
That's true. It's not active research, but it is constant thinking, a low level of thinking about it.
It's like before I go to bed, I'm like, okay, we'll have to think about this some more.
Now, this may have, I feel like this should be something I created background theme music for, but I'm going to go into a brief history of mashed potatoes, or also known as mashed taters.
Mashed taters?
I don't know too many people that refer to it as that, but
I do. Sometimes I call them mashed taters.
Mashed taters, or simply known as mash by the English. A dish of boiled potatoes, usually with added butter, sometimes milk, salt, and pepper. Other common ingredients include garlic or chives. Other types from other cultures include aloo barta, an Indian version which uses chopped onions, mustard seed, chili pepper, coriander, and other spices. A French variation adds egg yolk and are known as pomme duchesse. Pomme duchesse? I don't speak French. Yeah. And that is piped and lightly browned. It's generally served as a side dish to meat or vegetables.
See, you're looking at me.
I'm not making any arguments. I am listing facts about mashed potatoes. It's
I see your eyes, though, bro.
It's generally
so judgy McJudgy eyes.
Generally served as a side dish to meat or vegetables. An early recipe is found in Hannah Glass's 1747 recipe book, The Art of Cookery. Her recipe was milk, salt, and butter, and she is credited as the official creator of mashed potatoes. Now, many people associate potatoes with the Irish, when in fact, the history is not Irish. As we've learned, going down the history of many foods, it often becomes very depressing. And that's what I wrote here. As most things in history, the origin of foods is often unsettling. Potatoes were actually a staple for the Inca Empire. The Spanish conquistadors returned to Spain and brought back potatoes. The potatoes that were not eaten while on the voyage were planted ashore at the end of the 16th century. But I did not know this about potatoes. They did not take off in Europe. In France, they were so unappetizing, the French government passed a law banning them as a food source for humans in 1748 and were reserved for animal feed.
The French would do that, hence the French fry, huh?
Many believed potatoes caused leprosy.
Okay.
So it's a widespread belief that leprosy was caused by eating potato. However, a Frenchman was one of the first to create the tasty version of mashed potatoes. His name was Antoine Augustin Parmentier. He was captured by Prussian soldiers in the 7-Year War and was forced to live on potatoes. This is where he discovered they didn't cause leprosy. Not only this, but they were in fact nutrient rich and could be delicious. After his release, this man, Antoine Augustin Parmentier, led a campaign about potatoes.
So POW,
and
then to like a lobbyist for
this
potatoes.
Man was passionate about potatoes. This led to the lift of the ban in 1772. Potatoes then became a staple of the diet by the end of the 18th century. The reason they were linked so closely to the Irish people is because it became a staple of the working class of Ireland because they were inexpensive, easy to grow, and nutrient rich. And obviously the potato famine happened, which it creates this big link between the Irish and potatoes, when in fact it is an Incan food brought back by Spanish conquistadors. The French hated them, banned them, and this man, Antoine Augustin Parmentier, was so passionate that he brought potatoes back. And if it weren't for him, we may not all enjoy mashed potatoes as we do today.
Okay, so we could take that as a bunch of Europeans came to like Mexico area, took that, went back to Europe, put it in France, and the French goes, no, you know, and then a Frenchman goes, no, actually, there's something here.
I like to picture the first person to make the leprosy argument.
Yeah, I'm like, dude, like, how much in trouble were you? Then you had to be like, oh, it was the potatoes.
Yeah, like what? I didn't even look up. Do you even know what leprosy is?
Yeah, it's like basically your skin's rotting, sores and stuff like that.
How to get leprosy? It's
oh my gosh!
Probably not how I should phrase it. How do you cure? How is it caused? A comprehensive casual guide. It is curable. It is free of charge throughout the world. Probably not cured. Now, I'm surprised there's not an article about how to get it. There's many articles about how to cure it.
It's not, leprosy is not like a thing that's very common anymore.
No, I think once it became curable, we could get into dicey territory here, but when something's curable, you can take the thing that's needed to cure it. It's a contagious disease that affects the skin, mucous membranes, and nerves, causing discoloration and lumps on the skins, and in severe cases, disfigurement and deformities. And so somebody's like, where did you get that leprosy from? And they're like,
eating potatoes.
Where were you last night?
Yeah,
that you caught this leprosy. No, those potatoes. We should ban them. On to a brief history of guacamole.
Yeah.
Now, guacamole, or the informal guac, is an avocado-based dip or spread first developed in Mexico. The recipe most commonly uses avocado, salt, lime juice, cilantro, onions, and jalapenos. The name comes from the Aztec word aguacamole, which translates to avocado sauce. The avocado has its origins in south central Mexico. Guacamole was first created by the Aztecs of this region. Weird similarity between the two.
Now, I'm just saying, they're weird cousins.
But see, this proves my credibility as a researcher. I am not out to find the facts to only support my side. I am not a lawyer. I am not a politician. I am here to find the truth. You let the
facts. Yeah, you're the seeker of truth.
I'm the seeker of truth. Yeah. I have my argument going into, which is the opposite of yours, but I'm here to find the truth.
Truth is your muse, and you search for her.
This is absolutely correct. The Aztecs of this region, avocado seeds were first found in the Tehuacan Valley of Mexico 9,000 to 10,000 years ago and were domesticated around 5,000 BC. Once again, Spanish conquistadores come in. They come in.
Oh, freaking Europeans.
They come in to conquer, and they were introduced to guacamole in the 1500s. They tried to bring it back to grow themselves. They tried to bring it back and grow it themselves, but
they're like, no bueno.
Avocado does not grow naturally in Europe.
Why not?
Weather.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, weather. Big fan of weather. The first recipe for guac was in the 1697 book, A New Voyage Round the World. English voyager William Dampier noted a preparation of avocados, sugar, and lime juice. Very simple recipe. Now, what explains the meteoric rise of guacamole in the United States? Why does it seem like this is only a relatively new thing? There was a ban on Mexican avocado imports from the 1910s up until 1997.
Wow.
Which made guacamole very rare in the United States until the 21st century.
97?
1910s to 1997. So it wasn't really until the 21st century that you could legally import Mexican avocados, which are where almost all of guacamole comes from.
Yeah.
And then the rise in popularity of guacamole is greatly contributed by many to the rise of the Latin American population in the U.S. over the last 50 years.
Oh, I thought you were going to say it was the rise of Chipotle.
Well, probably has a huge part of it. And you could make the argument that things like Chipotle wouldn't exist if that lift of the ban of that the lift of the ban of avocados was not lifted. Now,
what do we take from this?
It will be parts of the argument as we go along. I just wanted to make sure I wanted to make sure our listeners are fully versed in what are mashed potatoes and what is guacamole, and to have a deep understanding as we have this conversation. Your argument that they are the Irish version of guacamole, I understand. The preparation is similar. You said, you mash the avocados. This makes it mashed potatoes. So are you saying anything that is ground or mashed that has a substance similar to potato or avocado is now a guacamole?
No.
If I were to mash a tomato into a paste, you can find tomato paste at the grocery store. Is tomato paste the tomato version of guacamole?
Have you seasoned the tomato paste?
I'm just going to put that out there. We can go back to it.
Hey, I'll throw you another one.
I just want to throw out my main points here.
Okay.
Mashed potatoes are eaten on their own as a side. Guacamole is not. Mashed potatoes are categorized as a side dish. Guacamole, as found in the brief history of guacamole, is an avocado-based dip or spread.
Okay.
I'm not saying you can't eat it on its own. but because it's a dip or spread, it's the same reason you don't bring. Let me finish here. It's the same reason you don't bring a jar of avocado spinach dip to a party and bring a spoon and start eating it in front of people. People would say you're out of your mind. But if you brought mashed potatoes and served yourself a scoop and started eating with a spoon, no one would look twice. Those are the two main points to me.
Yeah.
That just because preparation is similar and...
Define dip.
A dip would be something that is primarily eaten by dipping something else into it, like a chip or cracker or pita.
When you dip something into it, wouldn't that become that, that side dish of that?
No.
Why not?
Because a side dish is eaten on its own.
How do we know that some people just don't eat guac on their own?
Well, I'm sure they do. There's billions of people in the world. You can't make the argument.
Dude, have you not had...
You cannot make the argument.
You not had like if you go to Maya's Cuisine, you get the Mexican plate, right? It's called the Mexican plate. It's literally called the Mexican plate. And you can get like a scoop of guac with it.
For the use to be put on other things as a spread.
Okay, have you ever...
When you sit down for the Mexican dish, how do you eat the guacamole?
It's called the Mexican plate.
Mexican plate.
Yeah.
How do you use the guacamole on the dish? Do you sit there with a spoon and go, you know what? I'm going to eat this guacamole first, and you eat it with a spoon and then go on to the other things on the plate?
I eat the other things, and then I take, like, if it was a side dish, a spoonful of it, and I eat it with the other things.
So you're just deconstructing a dip instead of taking something and dipping it into the dip.
How many times have you taken your turkey and dipped it into your mashed potato?
That is my one counterpoint I've written on here.
Oh, suck it!
We will get to that.
How many times have you done that?
I'm going back.
How many times have you done that?
I'm going back to your argument.
How many times have you done that?
I'm going back to your argument of that you said, well, how do you know there's not somebody out there eating guacamole on its own? How do I know there's not somebody out there that wakes up every morning and rubs peanut butter all over their body and say it's a lotion? You can't say because someone...
well, most of those people have an OnlyFans website, and it's $14.99 to subscribe to.
But no, it's a lotion because, look, it has oil in it. It has peanut oil. It's very good as a lotion.
Absolutely.
So now that I use this, I said that peanut butter is a lotion. It's not a
So
food.
Are we saying that food is defined by the person?
Are you saying...
Or do we have to have a definite definition of food? Or whatever the food is?
A general consensus. The majority of people would eat it this way, therefore it is that thing.
Yeah, but, okay, twice baked potatoes, right? Mm-hmm. It's a mashed potato you're making. Mm-hmm. And then you spread it back into the potato, and you put it in the oven, you put the cheese on it, and blah, 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 right?
And then eat it on its own as a side dish.
But it's a spread?
That's a very weak argument. But then,
bro, don't even. That's a spread.
It's a potato on a potato. You're literally making
if you think about it, I call it Inception potato because it's a potato inside a potato.
You're making a different version of mashed potato.
Yeah, and then you spread it into the boat that you created out of the potato that you scooped out for the twice bake.
Yeah, so it's still a side dish.
Yeah, but it's a spread though. You spread it,
potato on potato.
Yeah, but you spread it. If the definition is just spread and dip, like or even if you use the potato as a dip, where you dip your turkey into it, you dip your steak into it.
Because the one counterpoint I had written as mashed potatoes as a side is mashed potatoes on a Thanksgiving leftover sandwich.
Yeah,
and this brings me to the thought of mac and cheese right now. That you're seeing mac and cheese being put on pizzas. I had a guest on that created a line of frozen pizza featuring a mac and cheese frozen pizza. Shout out Ryan Leonard over at Revitalite. Mac and cheese is now being put on burgers, on sandwiches.
Yep. Same thing with barbecue.
Because it's being used in an unusual way, it doesn't change what the primary use or consumption of that dish is. Because there is such a thing as a twice-baked potato in which you spread mashed potatoes into it, it doesn't make mashed potatoes on its own an entirely new thing. I wouldn't say mashed potatoes is now a condiment because it's being used on top of this potato.
Okay, I see. Here's the other thing. Now, does a guacamole have to be flavored and smashed together?
Keep going.
because, I've had, plenty Latin food where guacamole, like the avocado is taken out, it's sliced and they sprinkle salt and pepper on it.
I would argue that is not guacamole. As I read in the brief history of guacamole, it comes from the Aztec word aguacamole, which translates to avocado sauce, not avocado slices.
Okay, I'm just throwing out some stuff.
You're throwing it out, and you can throw it right into the garbage.
Yeah, I don't think so. Okay, you're telling me that if I took some mashed potatoes and I, make it into kind of like almost like this like gooey sauce, and then it becomes a dip for like pita, like it's no longer mashed potato. It's like a potato dip.
I would say that. So let's keep going with this potato dip. Mm-hmm. How would you prepare it differently from mashed potatoes? Because then
I would just up the cream content or something like that, like the fat content in there.
Yeah, I would say this is a cream sauce with potato.
Oh, so it's a cream sauce with potato.
Because I think once the ratio gets to a point that
what's the ratio?
Well, the highest ratio I found was a French dish that was 2 parts butter to 1 part potato.
That's a lot of butter.
Yeah, it's a lot of butter. And it basically, they were like, this isn't mashed potatoes, but here's like a dish that the French do.
Yeah.
And at that point, I would say, well, this isn't mashed potatoes, because I think the consistency of mashed potatoes, once you get to that more sauce-like consistency, I don't think most people would look at it and say, oh, this is a mashed potato. They would say this is a sauce that uses potato.
But isn't mashed potatoes then, with that, isn't mashed potato just a really thick potato sauce? Isn't
a steak just really thick? I don't know.
What? No, I mean, think about it, right? Because we're getting to the technical aspect of it, but it's all about ratios, right? So when does a guacamole become avocado sauce?
When it has a smooth consistency. I suppose you can have...
I don't know, man, because some people call that guac also. It's just called smooth guac.
Because you can have smooth guac, you can have chunky guac, but I think we have to...
Chunky guac, that's a good name for a band.
I think we need to come together on the point that there's a certain consistency where it is no longer a slice and it is now a guacamole. I would say the difference maker there...
I agree with you on the slice part.
Yeah, but that is now, we're into the point that there is a point where it's no longer sliced and it is now guacamole.
Yeah, it's the same thing with like French fries, right?
I would say that the difference would probably be how it's prepared or removed from it. So like guacamole, they use the traditional...
pestle mortar.
Yeah.
Mortar and pestle.
Yeah, mortar and pestle. And... It's like crushed and mashed. But with like chunky guac, you're still doing that, but just lesser so there's still big chunks left into it. With mashed potatoes, they're boiled, and then they use a potato masher to create that consistency. The question is, if you just use a potato masher and hit a potato once, and it's just all potato chunks, is it technically mashed potatoes because I've mashed this potato with a masher, but I just did it once, and so it's just like in big pieces? Is it the preparation of each of these dishes that makes it? And what's the minimum amount of preparation that can be done to still have the mashed potatoes be mashed and the guacamole be an avocado sauce?
Or avocado puree.
Or avocado puree. And even the word sauce, it may be a difference in translation from the Aztec or Spanish language to how we think of sauce.
Yeah, but I still think that if you want to, you can just eat your guac as a side dish.
Let me ask you this. Do you agree that mashed potatoes are generally consumed as a side? The broad majority of cases in which mashed potatoes are offered, I think
it's fluid. I think it's a fluid thing. You can't define it.
I'm not talking about you in your kitchen. I'm not talking about the guy. I'm not talking about the guy spreading peanut butter on his body as lotion. I'm talking about in general with the menus across the U.S.
Yeah.
When mashed potatoes is on the menu, would you say that the broad majority of these is offered as a side dish?
I think it's a category that it's offered in, but like, okay. So are we talking about categories of this food or how it's used?
Well, that goes back to the question.
Because, okay, how do you define a side dish, right? On a menu, let's go to a restaurant on the menu, right? Side dish is like you can, it's on its own section, right? And in that section, you know, like, oh, get a side of like corn for $3.50 or side of mashed potato for $3.50. You know what else is on there? You can get a side of guacamole for $3.50.
This is true, because I suppose it would be called an
add-on or whatever you want to call it, right?
But the thing is on a menu between these two is you've got sides.
Yep.
That's where mashed potatoes would be listed. Add-ons or extra side or extra of is where guacamole would be. I don't think you see it under the same part of the menu, because the reason it's on a separate part of the menu is because the intended application and use of this is why guacamole would be placed. Would you like an extra side of ranch? Would you like an extra side of barbecue sauce? Would you like an extra side of whatever it may be that you're consuming? Would you like an extra side of hollandaise if you're having eggs Benedict? Because those are all grouped together because the expected application of how that is going to be consumed. They know that people are going to be dipping or spreading it on the food that it's coming with. You don't see I don't think you really see people ordering a side of guacamole and then just eating it with a spoon and being like, this is good.
You ever see people just order a side of mashed potatoes and just eating it with a spoon, or do you order it with something?
Well, I mean, if you ordered a dish that didn't come with mashed potatoes, yes, someone would order mashed potatoes and eat it with a spoon, and no one would be like, are you gonna have anything with that? Are you gonna spread that on anything? Are you gonna put that on anything?
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, I mean, if we're just saying a side dish is a side dish, where it's like, what makes a side dish is that it's a side of something.
I think we're at two different things here.
Are we?
The one that I don't think we're gonna meet halfway on is that our mashed potatoes, I'm going to change the wording of these, are mashed potatoes the European version of guacamole, since that is historically accurate.
Yeah.
Our mashed potatoes the European version of guacamole. I don't think we're going to come together on it being the same thing of how it's used with food.
Yes. Okay, I would agree with that. But I would say that it is the European version of guac.
We can go back to that in a second, because I'm going to try to think of better examples of what better. If we're talking about application of something, I think there's probably a better version than mashed potatoes, because how I see it as a side dish and guacamole is a dip or spread. However, if the argument is it the European version of guacamole because it's essentially prepared the exact same way. Now, the big difference being here is that you have to boil a potato to be able to mash it. So if you open Pandora's box...
Oh, yeah. Well, let's go there, because I was thinking about that, too.
If you open up Pandora's box on food preparation, making dishes the same, this reminds me of going back to the soup episode.
Absolutely.
That now we're talking about anything that's basically mushed up and add a few things to it, and that is what it is.
Yep.
Now we're saying that is... what other foods are there that you would just mash up? Creamed corn? Is creamed corn a version?
You don't mash up creamed corn.
Maybe I'm actually arguing myself out of this one, because we're going to come. But I have to imagine.
What do you do with chickpeas and mash it up?
Hummus. So are hummus, mashed potatoes, and guacamole the same thing, just different foods?
Yep. Think about it. If you want to go strictly just dip, isn't hummus like a Middle Eastern version?
So
of
really,
guac?
what we've gotten here is, I wish I would have done more.
Baba ganoush.
There's not
Baba ganoush.
There's not a lot known about how the Aztecs ate potatoes, because it was so early that there's like no real recipes. The only recipe you have, and even the only mashed potato recipe
when the white man came in.
Yeah, white men. Freaking worst, dude.
Yeah.
But this is interesting.
Baba ganoush, right?
Because what we've uncovered here, and I still stick to my argument that as it lies in American culture today, that it's a side dish. But maybe what we've uncovered, have Americans miscategorized mashed potatoes.
I think they have.
Because if you look at any other type of food that is prepared how mashed potatoes are prepared, it is used as a spread or dip. You know what food is prepared the same as mashed potatoes and eaten on its own? Baby food. Are we babies, America?
Yes.
Is that what we're saying?
I think it is.
That we're going to mash up a food and eat it on its own as a side when, in fact...
Yeah, you don't see mashed carrots?
Unless you're a baby.
Yeah. You don't see mashed peaches?
Unless you're a baby.
Yeah.
So
what's that exact thing? I'm just a baby. I'm just a baby.
So maybe what we've uncovered here is not the argument, are mashed potatoes the European version of guacamole? We're asking today, in front of at least 3 people listening, did America categorize mashed potatoes incorrectly as a side dish?
I think so too, because what I've done before, grits. If you want to look at that, So what I've done before is we've done dishes where I've taken a potato puree, whatever you want to call it, mashed potato.
What are grits? Like how do you make them? I've never made them. I've had
grits.
them.
Oh, it's corn. It's corn that are crushed up.
Yep.
And then you cook it with water, butter. You cook it down, and it's a mush basically.
So grits was kind of like what I was trying to say, like with the cream corn example, but a better example.
Yep. Grits, same thing. But the corn is crushed up before you you don't make the corn and mash it up, but
which is a key point here.
Yep.
Maybe that's why that stands up as a side. But mashed potatoes don't, because the preparation of mashed potatoes makes it a dip.
Yeah, I mean, what I've done is I've made mashed potatoes, or if you want to call them potato puree, whatever, right? Where you make them a little bit smoother, or you also you have a little higher butter and cream content, and you put it on the bottom of the plate, and it's more of a dip. It's more of a spread, right? And
I wonder. Now, obviously, there's going to be no way that we're going to be able to find this out today, or maybe ever. I wonder how the Aztecs used potatoes in their cooking.
Oh, I bet you they just boiled it, or they roasted it, because it's all root food. You know what I'm saying? It's all,
And so it probably wasn't used. Our first example of mashed potatoes is when it was in that 1747 recipe book, The Art of Cookery by Hannah Glass.
Yeah, it's a European recipe.
So mashed potatoes, the preparation was the European part.
Yep.
So mashed potatoes on their own is a European thing. Potatoes themselves are not, which I did not know before this research. Based on how they're prepared, though, it really is more of a dip. And then it starts to wonder, are we limiting ourselves in the application of mashed potatoes because of this?
Absolutely, I think we are.
If the French, after Antoine Augustin Parmentier made his life's work, that potatoes are legit.
We should have a mashed potato day in honor of him.
The fact that I don't know this name, but I mean, so I suppose it's not for Antoine Augustin Parmentier. We're not just talking about mashed potatoes. If we're talking about Hannah Glass, she's credited with the recipe of mashed potatoes. Antoine Augustin Parmentier devoted his life work after getting out of prison to making sure people knew.
As a prisoner of war,
people knew that potatoes were nutrient-rich and delicious.
Because that's what got him through prison, if you think about it.
Picture all the applications of potatoes today. Chips, or as the English call them, crisps. Or fries, or as the English call them, chips. It's such a big staple of diets around the world.
Do you know why they're called chips? Why the English call fries chips?
Because they're chips of potato?
Yeah, because they used to just take, they had boiling hot oil, and they just take their knife and they just chip the potato when they cut them. They just chip them into the hot boiling oil.
And
they're more like wedges, I guess you want to call it that.
And crisps makes more sense when you think about what it is. It's really a potato crisp.
Why is a cookie a biscuit?
But saying crisps is so annoying.
Yeah.
That's such an annoying.
Kind of the barbecue crisp.
Anything with
Barbecue crisp.
Anything with SPS as the plural.
The ranch crisps.
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 Crisps. I don't know, English is my second language, so.
Fries. That's nice.
America.
Freedom fries.
Freedom.
So if it were not for this man, all these delicious things, potatoes are one of the most versatile foods in existence. We would not have these things if it were not for this man. But when it comes to mashed potatoes, Hannah Glass is the one to blame here. She, in the art of cookery, made this recipe, and I would love to get a copy of this book. It would have to be the original, because I can't trust anything on the internet.
No.
If there's people believing that the earth is flat, there are people who would manipulate this information for their mashed potatoes agendas. But I wonder, in the art of cookery, how she listed it to be consumed. Because Hannah Glass of 1747...
That's not what the job of a recipe is, right? Job of the recipe is just how to make it. However you want to consume it, that's up to you. That's the freedom you have in food.
We're going to take a quick break here because I want to look at the art of cookery and really come down to who classified how to consume mashed potatoes. Because basically, I think what you've done with mashed potatoes, with this original recipe, milk, salt, and butter. Now, see, I don't know if she's English or French, but they didn't have a lot of spices. You're limiting the potential of mashed potatoes because the recipe was made in an area without many spices. If the Aztecs had come up with mashed potatoes as they did guacamole, perhaps it would be classified as a dip because it would be flavorful additions to food versus it's kind of bland, but it's nutrient rich and people just like butter in general. So it became its own thing on the side because adding it to food didn't add much, especially if the food already had butter as a part of it. So basically what you've done with mashed potatoes is created a dish that's just like an extra infusion of butter into a full plate. But I want to take a quick pause here and see if I can't look into the art of cookery by Hannah Glass of 1747 and see if she included how mashed potatoes should be consumed. And we're back. I am looking at the art of cookery from Hannah Glass to figure out who the heck decided that mashed potatoes are to be eaten on their own and not to be used as a dip or spread.
Did Hannah decide that?
Now, it's not fully conclusive evidence here. There doesn't appear to be explicit definition that it needs to be eaten on their own. But the method says boil your potatoes, eat them, put them in a saucepan, mash them well to 2 pounds of potatoes, put a pint of milk, a little salt, stir them together. Take care they don't stick to the bottom. Take a 1/4 pound of butter, stir in, and serve it up. Serve it up. Is that the moment in history that mashed potatoes became a side? Not explicitly, because you could say the same thing at guacamole. Now, the part of this book that this recipe is called For a Fast Dinner, a Number of Good Dishes, which you may make use for a table at any other time. Like I said, off mic, people used to talk really weird. The original thing was completely handwritten, and thankfully I was able to find someone that translated it to actual written or typed text so I could find the part I needed. Question. Not to say that avocados don't have a lot of nutrition on their own. Are mashed potatoes as a side dish just a result of scarcity? Because the Aztecs in Mexico had a number of foods, number of spices, a lot of different ways to prepare them. Across Europe, potentially, because of the times, that the reason potatoes became so popular versus not being a huge staple of Mexican, or like as we were going down the list of the burrito episode, these ancient empires in Mexico, potatoes weren't a huge part of the diet. It was just part of how you made things. Did the European scarcity of food potentially lend to mashed potatoes being needed as a side because they are, dense in nutrients? Is this what caused not the fact that mashed potatoes are best served as a side dish, but out of necessity to be served as a side dish because of the availability, versus avocados in Mexico didn't become a side dish. They became what they should be, guacamole, as a side or as a dip or spread. And the reason mashed potatoes didn't become a dip or spread is because it was needed to be a side as a staple of the diet. Maybe there weren't enough other foods or enough nutrient-rich foods that it could be added on that everyone had regular access to.
It's like at the end of Batman the Dark Knight, and Commissioner Gordon goes, he wasn't commissioner yet, I think, but he goes to Batman, You're not the hero that we want, but you're the hero that we need.
Exactly.
So when you look at a potato and you're looking at mashed potato, this isn't the side dish that we want, but it's the side dish that we need.
And if the mashed potato was invented today in America, where
mashed potato,
let's just say that limited food, I'm not making light of this issue, but we seem to have a gluttony problem in this country. Overconsumption is probably potentially a issue. That if mashed potatoes were just, let's say Hannah Glass of 2022 came along. Had to double check that was the year. Hannah Glass comes along in 2022. Let's say the French are still like, we just lifted the ban.
We just lifted the ban on the...
All right. Antoine Augustine Parmentier, we saw your Instagram and your tweet that went mega viral. We have determined there's not a link between potatoes and leprosy. These are actually delicious and nutrient dense. And then Hannah Glass comes along in 2022 and says, I've come up with a new recipe. Maybe then it's not created as a side because it's prepared so similarly to all dips and spreads.
Yeah. And because we do have other... like breads and, like all this, like all these carb / like fillers already,
And perhaps because the Europeans had limited access to spices, that's a history that's not fun to go down because they really went out and got those spices, but they had limited access to spices. Today, in 2022, Hannah Glass comes along. I would argue she probably wouldn't limit it to milk, salt, and butter. She would probably look at all these amazing spices you could add to it. Let's go back to the Indian variation, aloo bharta, chopped onions, mustard seed, chili pepper, coriander, and other spices. Now that's starting to sound like a dip or a spread to me.
Like a hummus.
Like a hummus. And so perhaps it was the scarcity of food and the necessity of the potato as a staple of the diet and the lack of spices.
Okay, then let's take it a little deeper. Would you say that these dips and sauces comes out of, it's a symbol of wealth or a symbol of prosperity of a culture that they can take different elements and make it into like a dip instead of or is it just
could be,
or just because of the fact that the potato is a starch and it's a filler?
That very well could be the question, because
how many avocados do you have to eat before you're full?
Well, they're so the avocado is very rich in healthy fats.
Yes.
So it's actually very filling.
Do you think they knew that at that time?
Well, and that's what I'm questioning. I'm wondering how many applications of avocados there were. Like, are they putting sliced avocado, like you see avocado toast? That's not really guacamole. It's more like
Is it?
Oh, God.
Because some people, they'll take their avocado out and they'll put in salt and a little garlic and a little lime juice and a little cilantro and then they'll put the everything bagel seasoning on top and or whatever, and then put it on the toast.
I'll say it's a highly Americanized version of guacamole for sure.
But what's Americanized? Because are we just saying what makes a guacamole and a hummus is just the seasoning? Or
I want to go back to the point you made because it was really interesting. We're not going down that rabbit hole.
I'm just saying, what's a burrito?
Because that's a whole define the food. Now we're defining guacamole. I do not want to go down that path. But the point you made is interesting, and I don't have enough historical knowledge to be able to say, are dips and spreads a sign of stability in the food, access to food? Because if you don't have access to food, you're not thinking about, what would go great with whatever I'm eating right now, some sort of dip or spread.
Because what those dip and spread really does is it adds the flavor. Like, for example, if we're eating, let's just say we're eating some kind of fish, right? You just got white fish, grilled, whatever. But if you take something like a hummus or like a guac and you add it to that fish, it actually really enhances the flavor, right?
And so dips and spreads are almost an indicator that if a culture has dips and spreads, and, you know, today when there's greater access to food and, like, you know, the globalization of food, that like dips and spreads, you can go buy them at the supermarket. But like during the times where there wasn't so much globalization, if you were to visit a culture and they had dips and spreads, it probably means they had enough time or like access to food that they thought, how can we make this taste better? Versus if you were just seeking sources of food, or if you're just seeking sources of food and you found, let's say, chickpeas, you wouldn't say, how could I make this into a delightful dip or spread? You would eat the chickpeas.
Yeah, because it is something that
it's purely functional.
Yeah. But here's the other thing too. Is it, you know, a symbol of, you know, prosperity in a culture? Or is it, if you go the other way, dips and spread is like, we're going to take something small, make it very flavorful. So then what we have is, for example, like we can make like, you can take like tortillas, right? And just take the tortilla and dip it into the guac or whatever, and then the tortilla becomes the sustenance, and the dip and spread is actually the flavor for it. Does that make sense? Because like, if you think of like Indian food, a lot of Indian food is different kinds of dips or spread or very saucy, and then you take the naan and you dip it in there and then you eat it, because it's about the variation of the flavors. And you're trying to make it very flavorful. So that's why it's always very, like, the heat's really high. And
then the question becomes, are dips and spreads, are they initially formed as like, oh, a nice little side thing to have as an appetizer? I can answer that now. Definitely not.
Yeah.
Or is it just a function of what's your most, what are normal ways in your culture, or what are commonly used ways in your culture of consuming food? Well, in Europe at the time, it was probably using utensils. If you're in a culture where naan is very popular.
And it's all hand use.
Ethiopia.
Sticky rice, with different kinds of,
Ethiopia, you've got the injera. If you've ever eaten your food, you have to tell people that, like, oh, no, the sticky rice is perfect for, like, forming a utensil, and that enhances the eating experience. Like when you go to a Vinai feast or a Union Hmong Kitchen feast, some people are like, no, I need my utensils. And you're like, that's not how we eat this. So perhaps the advent of dips and spreads in general is more so how you eat it. So the reason mashed potatoes may have been classified as that in the first place was just because they were created in Europe, where they were using utensils.
Yes, where the fork and spoon is used. And then it's like, oh, it's more of a side dish because you
just eat it.
Yeah.
Because it's not normal in that food culture to create naan and to use that as a vehicle for eating these spreads or dips. That is an interesting point. So I think we have come together more than I expected, but where we came together is, yes, mashed potatoes are the European version of guacamole, but mashed potatoes are inherently categorized incorrectly as a pure side dish to be consumed on their own.
I would agree with that.
And I would argue, as I was earlier, that if mashed potatoes were created today in the U.S. or wherever, where access to spices with the globalization of recipes, it wouldn't be what it is. Nobody would take a potato, mash it, add milk, salt, and butter, and say, I'm going to eat this on its own, and this is the most delicious it can be.
What if the quote unquote mashed potato was discovered by the Aztec? Would they have used the same application as they did with the avocado?
And that's what I'm getting at.
So it's more of the culture.
My guess would be that if they did mashed potatoes
and the utilization of the culture because if you think about, like, a lot of potatoes, especially in India, they make it into this more of like this curry soup stew type thing, where then they dip the naan into it. They dip into the flatbreads into it.
And when you think about our episode on the history of the burrito, the history of the burrito, really the tortilla is a delivery mechanism for food. And then it's changed into its whole own thing. If the mashed potato was created in that culture where, like, the tortilla or these different types of foods are consumed in that way, it probably would be a staple at Chipotle right now.
Yeah.
So when you walk into these places that are doing burritos looking at, like, traditional burrito ingredients, perhaps the mashed potato of Mexican descent, the potato being of Mexican descent, if it was created there with the spices they had and the preparation methods of how they ate things, perhaps the mashed potato would be seen entirely different by the world today.
Yes. So what we have learned is the Europeans, they take everything and they just take it back to Europe.
Yeah, that's the depressing truth about pretty much every historical.
But isn't that crazy though? Like to learn the fact that potatoes are actually from Mexico.
Yeah,
or like what is modern day Mexico now?
Yeah, and I didn't know that going into
because that's mind blowing, right? Because when you think potato, everyone thinks Irish, everyone thinks Irish. But it's okay. So like all seriousness, and we goof around with this, but all seriousness is like learning that today actually expands your mind of understanding. Going, wow, how powerful is it that the people who, quote unquote, write history, if they look a certain way, they come from a certain ideology, they utilize history to tell the story of something that, or whatever, like let's just say the potato, because we think potato, we think of, the great potato famine, Irish, potato. When you think of, St. Patty's Day, it's, corned beef and potatoes, potatoes. But not knowing that potato went to Europe, Ireland, and then come back home. And
it's that famous saying, I don't know who to coin it to, but it's like history is written by the victors.
Yeah. And so I bet you some conqueror guy,
the conquistadors, who do you think's telling the stories about these potatoes?
Yeah.
They're going, I brought this back. This is a Spanish thing now.
Because I think I would believe that for the Incas, it's like, yeah, dude, that's just what we have. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's like, or in the Aztecs, and they're like, this is just what we have. This is what we do. Like, this is part of life. Like, it wasn't like, guys, I discovered this thing called potatoes, and it's going to feed millions.
And it's the tooth. I did not expect there to be this intense connection between guacamole and mashed potatoes of being.
But they're cousins.
They're like of both Mexican descent, and so they come from the same region of the world. And that's the most intriguing thing of all this to me is like, perhaps if avocados could be grown in Europe.
Yes.
Oh, that's where we got to finish this episode. If avocados could be grown in Europe,
we would have mashed avocados as a side dish.
You'd have mashed avocados as a side dish. It would be bland. It would be bland and boring. It would have salt, pepper, maybe butter. And it would be something entirely different. And then that's a perfect place to end it. That if you could grow them in Europe, it would be a side dish similar to mashed potatoes because it's nutrient rich, it's dense, and if they were able to grow it like potatoes over there, everybody would have ready access to it.
Harvesting would be pretty easy. Just falls off the tree.
And it would become a staple of that diet.
Oh my gosh, mind blown.
Civilization, man.
Yeah, man. Civilization, man.
The more civilization advances, the more difficult things become, and yet...
Is this even real? Are we in the metaverse?
I don't really want to end it on this thought that popped in my head, but...
Do it.
This is where it gets interesting. There's a higher correlation between societies that are more technologically advanced and lowered poverty. But when you look at global warming, there's also higher associations with greenhouse gases and more technologically advanced societies. So that's why nothing's ever black and white, is because as you're starting to help one issue, you may be hurting another. So there's actually a weird inverse relationship between how green you are and the levels of poverty you have.
Here's one final thought. The whole time we're thinking about this, it's like, you ever watched the Marvel series called What If?
No.
Okay, so it's this whole idea of like, what if something was a little different, and how would all these like Marvel characters and superhero, how things would change for them, But it's like this idea of like look at your life, right? What if you turn left when you were supposed to go right? Or you know what I'm saying? Like, where would you be now if, so it's like the multiverse thing, right? Like Rob, and let's just play a game of like, what are the 5 multiverses of different kinds of Rob? Like, would you, like, if you never said, hey, I want to do coffee.
Let's say I didn't have a coworker that said, why do you drink bad coffee? And pointed me towards that coffee shop on
Absolutely.
that one.
Yep. Or what if you said, I'm going to stick with Samuel Adams and I'm just going to go up the corporate ladder? Whatever, you know what I'm saying? But I mean, think about that from the avocado standpoint and the potato standpoint. What if potato stayed and avocado left?
mashed avocado would be served at Thanksgiving?
And guacamole. Guacamole would be made out of potatoes.
You know, it would be kind of a fun episode for the next one.
What's up?
I'm not committing to this, but I'll say it here. What if we did an episode on like the deep dive of how foods became part of certain meals? Like,
oh, absolutely, dude. That's
because somebody kind of blew my mind. They're like, you know, I was like, I don't like turkey. Like, it's not that good. And they're like, you don't have to serve that at Thanksgiving. I was like, oh, you could just serve whatever you want. You want to have a steak on Thanksgiving? Do it.
You know, the turkey wasn't really served on the first quote unquote Thanksgiving.
That's
right?
So cut it off there. Cut it off there because that's what the next episode could be. It's like, let's look at different types of culture, like
ham,
American meals.
Ham.
Yeah, let's take
in Christmas.
Let's take American meals, look at the traditional foods. We'll talk beforehand and be like, do you agree that these are traditional? Because that's its own thing. But we can look at the history. How did these become so closely tied? It's like the whole like Santa and Coca-Cola thing. I'm sure there's like all these things that you go, oh, it's always been this way. And you're like, nope. It's actually,
or the polar bears.
Yeah.
And Coke.
It's just like there's certain things that you go, the first image of Santa Claus was in a Coca-Cola ad. And you're like, wait, what? I thought that's just always how it's been. Anyway, I'm going to end it there.
What if?
What if? And then potentially the next episode is diving into the history of how foods became so closely tied to certain events. I'll end it as I do every other episode and say, have a nice day.